Hi, it's Cayman with S&B, and today we're going to install our 60-gallon replacement tank on this 2019 Ford F-250 crew cab short bed. This fits all 2017 and up Ford crew cab short bed diesel trucks. And if you already did get your tank, you're going to want to take this out of the white box and scan the QR code with your phone. Once you scan the QR code with the camera on your phone, it's going to take you to our most up-to-date installation instructions. So use this install video as an overview or as a guide, but make sure to follow the installation instructions during the install. This install can be done on the ground or on the lift, and today we're going to be doing the install on the lift since we are shooting a video. The first step is going to be to determine if you need to remove the filler neck from the bed. It's really easy to do, and we'll show you how to do so next, because the hose clamps on our hoses are facing up towards the bed, so they can't be accessed with a flathead screwdriver or even a socket. And so removing it from the bed makes it a lot easier, but we'll show you what it looks like up here. So to remove the neck from the bed, you're gonna remove the fuel line as well as the def cap. Then using a pick, remove the cover. As well as the 3 bolts with a 5/16 socket. Once you have the 3 bolts out of the bed, then we're gonna pull out the filler. So the filler came out of this hole. Then once you have it out, now you can rotate and access those hose clamps better off. And you can do it with a screwdriver. Now after twisting the filler neck, you can access these hose clamps better and remove both the filler as well as the vent. And we're gonna remove the filler neck completely. Then we'll reinstall the filler neck metal part before we install the S&B tank. Now with a 13 mil socket, we're gonna be removing the bolts for the factory skid plate if your truck did come equipped with a factory skid plate. And this skid plate can be reused with the S&B tank as well. What we do is we'll be using spacers that space down the skid plate straps. Now, since we are doing the install on the lift, we're gonna raise this jack underneath the tank. If you're doing it on the ground, make sure that you have not much fuel in the tank. Or if you do have fuel in the tank, make sure you're using ratchet straps or some kind of floor jack, or using a friend to help you guide the tank down. But I would make sure to do the install with as little fuel as possible in the tank. Now we'll be removing the fuel connectors, starting with this blue connector. On the 2020 and up trucks, this might be a white connector. And you can look at our installation instructions to see that there. But to start, we're gonna press out those fingers on the blue connector. Make sure it slides all the way out. It's not gonna remove from the black housing. It'll slide all the way out, then we'll push it out, push it off. So that'll come disconnected. And then this yellow connector as well. So this yellow connector, the base will slide out. You'll hear a click. We're gonna depress this tab. What a trick is to press in while you depress the tab. And then after you press in, pull it out. Now we'll be removing the electrical connector for the water separator, as well as removing the Torx 30 screw that holds the water separator onto the tank. Now we'll be removing the fuel tank straps and removing these bolts. Make sure to use a hand ratchet when doing so, because these J-nuts or J-clips or cage nuts, as they call them, can break since they are aluminum. If they do break, you can put a socket or put an open and wrench on the top to fix it and make sure you can get them back on or get the bolt off in the first place. But the rear one, you won't be able to. So make sure you're really careful with the rear passenger side bolt. Now that the fill and the vent lines are disconnected back here, as well as the feed and the return lines are disconnected in the front, and the water separator electrical connector is disconnected, we are ready to drop the tank once we remove the electrical connector off the top of the tank. So if you're doing this on the ground, I would recommend reaching your hand in over the frame and disconnecting the connector. But if you're doing it on a lift, you will be able to lower the lift or lower the jack a few inches to give you a little bit more space. But we'll show you where that is after I remove it. But I'm gonna stick my hand up and over the frame, and I'm gonna find the water separator or the sending unit guard. Then right underneath the sending unit guard is the electrical connector, and I'm depressing the button and pulling it off. And we'll show you what this looks like once we get the tank out of the truck. Now we have the S&B tank and the OEM tank staged next to each other. First step's gonna be removing this sending unit guard, and we're gonna remember how this is on the tank. So this smaller opening is facing directly to the side. So when we put that back onto the S&B tank, we're gonna remember that. And using a 10mm socket, we will get these removed. Now we're removing the locking ring. We're gonna be hitting this counterclockwise. Once that's removed, we will remove the fuel lines from the fuel line holder. We already removed the screw that's holding that water separator in. Now we're gonna go over to the S&B tank. Make sure to inspect the S&B tank with either a flashlight or a camera, or sticking your hand in to make sure there's no foreign debris inside the tank. And once you confirm that the tank is clean, we'll be removing this whole assembly over. And before removing the OEM sending unit over to the S&B tank, place the S&B black O-ring into the O-ring groove. Now bringing over the assembly. Make sure to find the green O-ring, and we'll slide that off the bottom. And this tab on the sending unit will be facing towards the arrow on the S&B tank. So make sure that the O-ring is in the O-ring groove when you drop this in. Now we'll be putting down pressure on the ring to get the ring started underneath the receiving teeth. And before we hit this ring to get it underneath the teeth, place the OEM guard over the top to make sure it's going to line up correctly. So you can see the studs. This second stud is right next to this arrow. And so when I place it on to test, after we rotate it clockwise, this is going to line up perfectly in this opening. Now we'll be hitting the ring clockwise. Make sure that you hit the ring until it passes underneath the dimple on the receiving tooth. So you can see that this from the OEM had lines to make sure that it does meet up. And then if you do have one of these tools, these are actually specifically for locking rings on fuel tanks, and can be used with just a ratchet. So if you have one of these tools that can be found at O'Reilly, it does make it easier to get the ring on, but it can, with force and a few swings, it can be installed with the dead blow in the mallet as well. Now we'll be placing the guard back on, getting these teeth started, or getting these nuts started, and we'll be tightening them down with a 10mm socket. Now, remembering how these are pointed on the OEM tank, we're going to transfer these over onto the S&B tank. And before putting the filler onto the S&B tank, we're gonna be installing this white check valve with the flow arrow going into the tank. So place that in, then we'll press it on to the S&B tank. Now is also a good time to zip tie this rear vent onto the main vent hose. And we'll trim that in a second. Now that we have the tank ready to go into place, we're going to be getting the front support ready. So to start, the bigger U-bolt, we're going to be guiding this over the front cross member, removing these two fuel lines from the holder. They'll go right back into place, but we need to slide the U-bolt behind it. Get that into place. Push fuel lines back on. The smaller U-bolt will also go over the cross member. Hold that to the side. Then the U-bolt holder. So the bigger U-bolt is going to sit right there, and then the smaller U-bolt is going to sit right there. Lay this up here. Then those holes on the top are going to line up with the holes here and in here. And using the bolts and the nuts, we're going to secure it into place. Make sure this bigger U-bolt is on top of the U-bolt holder. Find the holes through the hole in the cross member and stick in the bolt. And you can use by hand. You can get these nuts started. And the same goes for this one as well. And using an open end 14mm wrench, as well as a 14mm socket, we're gonna get this tightened. As well as tighten the rear. Now we'll be lifting the S&B tank into place, making sure that the tank clears the two front U-bolts, as well as making sure that this hose goes over both cross members and the rear vent and fill lines. We're going to need to lift those up and over the frame to make sure they don't get pinched in between. Now starting with the rear strap, we're going to be installing the S&B straps with the OEM bolts. So this is the longer of all the bolts. Get this in finger tight. We'll get it started with the ratchet. And we'll make sure it's torqued down correctly at the end. Now we'll be reconnecting the water separator electrical connector, reinstalling the Torx 30 screw into the water separator bracket. As well as the two fuel connectors, the return and the feed. And those will be found by feel and reaching up. Make sure you hear the click, and make sure to slide the locking tab in at the base, as well as the blue connector on the top. Make sure that's locked and snapped into place. And after that, we'll be installing the skid plate on the front. Now pressing up on this front support and skid plate. Guide the U-bolt through the holes. You may need to put the jack underneath this to get some more force. We use the jack to put some pressure underneath the skid plate slash front support. And once the U-bolts are showing some threads, we can get these on hand tight. And lastly, we'll be installing the middle strap onto the tank. Now we'll be reinstalling the metal filler neck since we had to remove it. Lastly, now we'll be installing the skid plate. If your truck did come equipped with an OEM skid plate, we allow you to reuse it with our 1 3/4 spacers. So just to show you what these are going to look like, these are going to go on top of these brackets, and they're going to mount in between the cross members and the straps using this longer bolt. So this bolt's going to go through, and it's going to secure into the cage nut on the truck. Now the final step is we're going to be putting the vent as well as the fill lines back onto the metal filler tube. That bigger fill tube might be difficult to get on. You can put some graphite on the inside of that if you need help pressing it on. Then make sure the hose clamps are facing you and can be easily accessed by a flathead screwdriver. So we'll tighten those up. Then we'll also put a zip tie around the breather tube coming from the front part of the tank, and that'll wrap up our install. And that's it. Let us know if you have any other questions. Our number is 909-675-1313. You can call or text us. Thank you.